Snipers, you have to see what's happening in the Bitcoin price right now. So you've seen a lot of bullish momentum for Bitcoin over the last few weeks, ever since the start of this year. And the big question is, where is Bitcoin headed in the immediate short term, but also in the medium term outlook? Let's dive straight into the chart, Snipers, because something that pops out right off the bat is the fact that we have our monthly open, our weekly open, and our previous weekly open just above the $28,000 level. This is the most important support level, Snipers, in the immediate short term if we want to see a continuation move to the upside for Bitcoin towards our first upside target of 35,000 US dollars. We must maintain price action right now above 28,000 US dollars, and 35,000 US dollars has been on our radar ever since Bitcoin made a move above 24,300. I told you, Snipers, the next upside target would be 35,000 US dollars. And of course, where are we today? Well, Bitcoin today, for the first time this year, crossing above 30,000 US dollars already now at the midpoint of this range. Remember, Snipers, the most important levels are the red lines on our charts. And you can see once the door opened above 24,300, just like we predicted, Bitcoin made its move towards the midpoint of this range where we're sitting at right now at 30,000 US dollars. But that's not it for Bitcoin. There's still some momentum on the table. If we hold above 28,000 US dollars, once again, that's going to validate the next upside move to 35,000 US dollars, which is our immediate short-term upside target for Bitcoin right now. And the question is, are we back inside of a bull market with Bitcoin right now above its 20-week moving average? Notice how we are far and above our 20-week moving average, sitting just below that $24,300 level now. Well, the question is, how are equity markets doing? Because of course, if equity markets cannot perform, it's going to make it difficult for Bitcoin to perform. Notice how the S&P 500 is still facing some resistance after we had this failed breakout of this ascending triangle. We broke down. Now we're facing this previous support as a resistance now. Notice how we have yet to cross above this major resistance level. And then if we look across the board, Snipers, notice how there is some other areas of resistance on our charts that we're currently about to face, with Ethereum heading towards a major resistance at 1980. More importantly, if we look at the Ethereum to Bitcoin pairing, this is a great sentiment indicator for the overall market. You can see we're still showing weakness below 65,000 Satoshis. This is not a good sign for the overall markets, because what this tells us is maybe what we're seeing right now is an allocation shift from altcoins into Bitcoin. And that's why you can see Bitcoin dominance right now forming new yearly highs, but also about to face a major resistance here at 48.94% dominance. That's actually where we initially topped out for Bitcoin in this recent bull market. You can see we have yet to really get above 48% dominance. We are now facing that level. And so we're certainly seeing some momentum for Bitcoin. But the question is, are we seeing this momentum because altcoins are shifting into Bitcoin, or is this truly institutional liquidity coming into the markets? Well, what do we want to look at if we want to determine whether this is institutional liquidity? Let's look at institutional volume. If we dive into this 6-hour chart and go back to the Bitcoin to USD pairing, this is Coinbase, so that we're not looking at any manipulated volume, what you'll notice here is we're actually seeing a slowdown in volume. We haven't necessarily seen a large amount of sell pressure just yet, but we're also not seeing a large amount of buy pressure. We're seeing a descending amount of volume. And so I know a lot of people are saying that there's going to be a de-dollarization. And of course, we're seeing countries like Russia and Brazil get together, trying to step away from the US dollar and move away from the US dollar. But are those countries strong enough to influence the most dominant currency in the world, which is the US dollar? That's sort of questionable. It would be an extreme opinion to think that there's going to be an immediate de-dollarization and hyperinflation in the immediate short term. I know we're seeing that with Coinbase's ex-chief technology officer saying that Bitcoin's going to hit $1 million. And yes, these are potential price targets for Bitcoin in the long term, but in the next 90 days, then the next 30 days, and the next 60 days, we could certainly assume that that's a very extremist point of view. And here on the Snipers channel, as you guys know, we always want to keep a realist perspective, not an extremist perspective, and certainly not an optimistic or pessimistic perspective, just a very neutral perspective. And so what I would say is for Bitcoin right now, we're certainly seeing momentum, but this is exactly what we've been expecting for Bitcoin getting above 24,300, we knew the door was open to 34,788 because we have the most accurate cryptocurrency technical analysis on the internet. We knew that this was coming for Bitcoin. Now that we're heading towards the midpoint of the range, and remember, if we want to also build a bear case here, we could also say that on the Bitcoin CME futures chart, we do have a massive gap down below around the $21,000 level. I'll show you that right now. If we go into the Bitcoin CME charts on the daily, you can see there's still a CME gap down here at 21,100 US dollars. And typically gaps do get filled. So if we see a break below this monthly open where we have a lot of confluence with the previous weekly open, the weekly open of 28,000 US dollars, guess what? There is a potential downside target towards 21,000 US dollars to just fill the CME gap for us to then potentially form another higher low and then see continuation of the upside. Now, these are all scenarios that are plausible. Of course, 28,000 US dollars right now is the most important level to watch for Bitcoin. And then what about the de-dollarization? What's happening to the US dollar? Are we really seeing that much weakness? Well, we've been monitoring the US dollar on this channel ever since we started to see a slowdown here in September of 2022, where we topped out and then we came, you can see, below this 20-week moving average, which we're still below this 20-week moving average. But just like when Bitcoin initially made a high, came below its 20-week moving average, and then eventually saw another high form, it was a higher high. On some charts, it was a lower high. What if we see the US dollar make another move to the upside now that we're starting to see some of the noise come behind us from what happened with the banking collapse and things like Silicon Valley Bank? What if we start to see momentum here for the US dollar? Notice how so far, based on the charts, we've been holding these lows, these recent lows that occurred here. You can see we had a very bullish weekly candle here for the US dollar, and we've yet to breach that low. So far, we're only forming a higher low. Could we assume that the US dollar is finding support at this previous resistance? This was essentially in 2020 when we saw a rush to the US dollar. It formed this high, which is now acting as a support. Remember, previous resistance will typically act as support. I would say the US dollar is still potentially in an uptrend. Yes, it's slowing down. Yes, it could have topped out, but that doesn't mean it's not going to make another push to the upside, which could affect the equity markets and the cryptocurrency markets, especially as we are facing some resistance on multiple different charts and timeframes. The total market cap, very interesting, because notice how we are actually trying to create support at this previous resistance of 1.132 trillion US dollars. This is also just as important as 28,000 is for Bitcoin. For the total market cap, we want to hold above this level if we want to assume further bullish action to the upside, which our next upside target would be $1.78 trillion, just shy of the $2 trillion level for the total market cap. But we have to hold above $1.12 trillion in order for that to happen. These are some very important levels to watch for Bitcoin snipers. So 28,000 US dollars in the immediate short term is extremely important for Bitcoin. And then of course, the $1.132 trillion level for the overall cryptocurrency market is also extremely important for us to hold as an immediate short-term support if we want to assume further upside. If we're above 28,000 US dollars for Bitcoin, the door is still open for 35,000 US dollars as our initial upside target, where then we could potentially start to see some resistance for Bitcoin. And so when we look at some other revolving parts, what I'll mention is Bitcoin against the SPY is doing extremely well. You can see new highs today for the year. We're seeing a lot of momentum to the upside, but once again, we are facing this area, which was previous support for Bitcoin's valuation against the SPY, which is now going to potentially be resistance. And so what that tells us is that despite the momentum that we've seen this year for Bitcoin year to date, I think at this point we are up over 70%. What that means is that we have to be extremely careful over the next few months as Bitcoin approaches these higher price levels when it comes to year to date performance, which of course, if we look at some other revolving parts, I want to mention gold against Bitcoin. Notice how gold's valuation against Bitcoin also hitting a major support level right now. What does that mean for Bitcoin? Well, that means that Bitcoin has been outperforming gold, but now that it's hitting a support level, does that mean that we may see a push back into gold from other assets that would actually bring this valuation a little bit higher, where it finds support here and then we see a bounce? That would actually mean that the cryptocurrency market wouldn't perform as well as gold. Gold trying to break back into price discovery, flirting with the $2,000 level. That's certainly on our radar right now in the immediate short term. So there's a lot of revolving parts that we have to continue to watch here. And overall, what I'll say is that volatility based on the VIX has started to come down, but we are back towards this major support here that is actually dating back towards 2018. You can see every time we've seen the VIX come and hit this support level, we've seen an increase in volatility, usually to the downside in the overall markets. Now we're back here at this support level. So a lot of revolving parts, a lot of momentum so far for Bitcoin. But the question is, are we going to be able to continue this momentum? That's all going to be dependent upon that $28,000 support level, in my opinion. And then across the board, what I'll say is that the fundamentals are just as important as the technicals. We're still seeing a lot of uncertainty with the US dollar, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're headed towards hyperinflation in the immediate short term. So if I could leave you with one thing here, snipers, before you leave this video, remember to smash the like button if you enjoy this content. It's the fact that you never want to have an extremist point of view. Always stay a realist, have a neutral perspective. Don't be too optimistic. Don't be too pessimistic. But obviously, we've seen a lot of momentum here for Bitcoin since the start of this year, exactly as we've been predicting here on the Snipers channel. As soon as we got above 24,300, we knew $35,000 was on the table. And guess what? Today we sit at 30,000 US dollars for the first time this year. What an amazing time for Bitcoin. But does that mean we should start taking long positions or short positions? I think right now, being in the middle of a range, it is not the time to be entering into large leveraged positions. We want to wait until we hit a support or a resistance for us to make a more calculated decision with calculated risk involved. And with that, thank you all snipers for tuning in to our channel today. We'll have some more content out for you guys as always. And until next time, snipers